to you.
Yes, Blanca, thank you very much for the introduction. Zdenek and Karel, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here. That's a very extravagant topic for me. I wish I had more time to produce something more interesting. But the suggestion that I do this came in the middle of I already had other commitments, so I have really not spared particularly big amount of time on this. Uh, Perhaps if I had more time, I would focus it more on film. But what I'll talk today is just completely improvised notes of kind of like, free flow of associations connected with mushrooms. The topic is fantastic, and essentially, I think you're doing a great thing in allowing yourself to have such an interesting topic and kind of like, committing to having such a topic. Because academia around the world, which I know very well, is usually very too kind of like, focused on delivering specifically products and so on, rather than kind of like, just having an interesting conversation. So it's great to be here and talk about fungi. And I said fungi, actually, so I had the Italian word in mind. But I was trying to start kind of like, various topics moving in my head. And the first thing I remember, which I didn't include in this presentation, the presentation is mainly images that prompt me to talk about things. Was I remember many years ago, as it so happened in my life, so I'm originally from Bulgaria, but it so happened that for the past 32 years I have lived in many different countries and have been in very many different contexts. And the first association that came to mind was the period about 30, close to 30 years ago. I was living in Texas in the south of America, and we would often travel to Mexico for the weekend. And of course, like, if there is division on nations, definitely America at large, even though you cannot speak at large, really. It's a collection of nations, but kind of America is more on the phobic side. But the moment you cross into Mexico, it's kind of like, so essentially there was a line, you eat everything. The moment you cross into Mexico, the world comes alive. It kind of becomes multicolored with smells, with noises, with everything, whereas kind of like an American life is much more structured and boring, actually. And one of the things which I remember there was said about Mexico was Mexican cuisine is so exciting, and Mexican cuisine is absolutely fantastic and exciting. And they were saying it is so exciting because we are poor people and we eat everything. And I said, okay, so why do you eat, what do you eat? Like, give me some example. And the main example that was given to me, I always remember it, they said, we eat the fungus on the corn. So I am a city person, so I have not had many experiences with cornfields, kind of like, mainly movies, Night Shyamalan or something like this. But kind of this has stuck in my mind because I eventually saw a documentary about one Mexican cook who is now developing haute cuisine in New York City, and she actually specifically travels to Mexico to find this. It is a blue fungus that grows on the corn, and now is making like some fantastic dishes with it, and so on. So something which was given to me as an example of most despised but yet cherished aspect. And like, we are poor people, we eat even the fungus on the corn, is now actually kind of held in very high esteem. So this was one association which I wanted to share. And this morning, it was very early this morning that I traveled to Prague. My son was driving me in the car, and I was telling him that, like, tonight I'll be talking on the topic of mushrooms, and ask him what do you think about mushrooms? And he says, do you know that certain scientific experiments have been made to connect to get the electric impulses of the growing fungi, and when they get these electric impulses, they can produce certain music. So I didn't know, so my son, who is in his 20s, told me about this. But this connects quite well with this little clip that I want to show. So I do not know enough films, or maybe at the moment I don't know enough films, because it's very well It may well be I live here and I start thinking, ah, yes, this one and this one and this one. But at the moment, it's kind of like I'm drawing a blank a little bit. But there is a colleague, and I think I told Zenek in an email about this, who is a film studies person in London, Jasper Sharp, who is an Englishman, but not your typical Englishman. In that he does not occupy a strict academic position, but he has produced quite a bit of scholarship, and his main reputation is on Japanese popular cinema. And, because you're popular culture people, I should mention this. So he has massive knowledge on Japanese popular cinema, and he has produced volumes on Japanese pink cinema, which is a specific kind of like soft porn genre, and like he's like encyclopedic knowledge on these kind of things. And then and my dealings with him have been in the context of talking Japanese cinema. But then at some point it came up that he just made a documentary film. This was about 6-7 years ago. I said, "What is your documentary film?" Assuming that it was in this topic, and it actually turned out that it was about fungi. And it's a fantastic film, The Creeping Garden, which I would like to show you a 3-minute clip from. And if you find it of interest, it's easy to order it on DVD, or I'm happy to put you in touch with Jasper. And so essentially, what I'm saying is that there is a popular culture person who is also into fungi. So can we play now the clip that we? And the film is called The Creeping Garden. I cannot remember. It's probably about 2015, between 2012 2015. And Now Ness is a very interesting website which shows excerpts of this, but it will give you an idea. And the fear for attraction is actually this next kind of mushroom, which again I don't even know what is it in English, because it is one of the most poisonous mushrooms in Bulgarian, as I'm Bulgarian. It's called muhomorka. Is it in the same genre? Yes, muha is the fly, like fly killer, right? So I do not even know if I have ever seen a muhomorka or kind of. I think actually I have some memories where I have seen, but deep back into my childhood, I think each child in Bulgaria, at least of my generation, knew about muhomorka, even though we were not. I'm a city child, absolutely, from the center of the capital, and like we didn't have any villages. I was not going often to any places where I would likely encounter muhomorka or anything like this. But every child knew about this very dangerous thing. So this was kind of like, I do believe if we speak about mushrooms, one of the things is that they are absolutely definitely used in creating childhood fears. And now in my old age, I often think of like, fears that I have experienced, like, completely unnecessarily, or kind of like you get indoctrinated into life through fears. So clearly, kind of like, you hear of these absolutely strange creatures that look so beautiful and attractive, and you as a child want to go and touch them and play with them, perhaps, or something like this. But you have to fear. So kind of like, introducing the concept of fear for attraction, I think in childhood, pretty much, at least for me, happened through mushrooms. But continuing to think about this, can we show the next image? I did remember, so the image of the muhomorka is used very much. It was difficult for me to find images, but still I was able to find some images. In the work of one person who was looming big in my childhood again, uh, who is book illustrator Vadim Lazarkevich. And up until today, because I only checked about him today for the purposes of this presentation, I always thought that he was a major Russian illustrator of children's books. But actually, I do realize that he was only working in Bulgaria now, because he was of white Russian descent, apparently, and he was a young man, about 20-year-old, when the Soviet Revolution happened. So, of course, like, all these countries, I imagine, Czechoslovakia has had its shares of white Russian refugees. And of course, I do remember from my childhood, there were still some old men around who had come around 1920. So Vadim Lazarkevich, it turns out, is one of these people, and all of his work has been actually in Bulgaria, so he wouldn't probably be well known outside of Bulgaria, but his work is absolutely fantastic because it's very colorful, very beautiful illustrations, and it is this word. So to make a Czech reference in what I'm saying, I remember from my childhood one Czech fantastic book that was giving me such great feelings, like Vadim Lazarkevich. You tell me who is the author of Birliban. Birliban, or do you know this is a famous Czech book?
Yeah.
You do, but only you know it.
I read it.
I've read it many times, and it was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Okay.
you can quickly check and see.
We believe you.
Because it's actually by some Eduard Petishka. Eduard Petishka, yes, is the author. And so when I love Billy, because Billy is some boy who is like, little chubby, goes into the garden through some holes, goes lies under some tree, and sausages fly from the tree into his mouth, so it's kind of like some fantastic word. Yes, you confirm this. So this what you see here is called gabarko in Bulgarian. Gabar is mushroom, and gabarko is mushroomy boy. I don't remember specifically this book, but there were many books, very richly illustrated, beautiful, by Vadim Lazarkevich, who always was creating this fantastic. So kind of on the one hand there was the fear, but the attraction was channeled through these images. And would you show the next slide, which also has some more images from Vadim Lazarkevich? So you can see, unfortunately, I'm not skilled with using this specific software, so I couldn't shrink exactly the image, but of course this is the mushroom mukhomorka, which what I remember from the story is how kind of this mukhomorka, even though it is dangerous, actually all the animals are attracted and essentially starts providing shelter and and it grows bigger and bigger from what I remember, because you realize I'm talking of something that I've read probably 50 something years ago. And you can see how the mouse and the rabbit and the ant and kind of sparrow and so on, they're all hiding, and Mukhomorka is giving them shelter. Then these other things on the side are from other books. And again, this is no longer Gabarku. So Gabarku in the previous image had only red mushroom cap on his head. But this guy here has this kind of polka dot cap, which is another guy, and kind of so these are illustrations to a poem. And the last image I find particularly interesting because I think it is evidently created with the intention to introduce children to that there are different kinds of mushrooms, and these are all from different books as far as I can tell. And from what I remember, but certainly the work of this author, for me, always kind of the moment we say mushroom is kind of this image from Humorka and specifically in the work of Vadim Lazarkevich. But to sum up what I wanted to say here, so I believe mushrooms have some kind of special function, at least in the culture where I come from, in childhood, where there is kind of they indoctrinate into fear. But at the same time, there is some acknowledgement, they're beautiful, they're interesting. You can bump at mushrooms when you go to the forest. They pop up in unexpected places. You can find them. So kind of so you can find there is excitement about this. But finding them also at the same time, you still have to be fearful in regard to them. So I think there is some complex. I don't know if Czech culture is the same, but there is some complex that develops. And now I am jumping into the next segment of what I want to talk about. is about my friend in Muskoka. Do you know what is Muskoka? Okay, so Muskoka is one extremely beautiful and kind of like, prestigious holiday area not far from Toronto on Lake Ontario. Kind of like, favorite retirement place, and it has kind of like, quite a bit of forests, these kind of things, and because it's retirement, it's kind of like, village like. Uh, and somebody who lived for many years in America, he's Canadian, originally from Toronto. His parents have retired in Muskoka some time ago, but he was in America now. His father has died. His mother is in her 90s, so he has returned from the States. So he's about my age, probably he's about 60 himself, but now parents live longer and longer, so he has returned to care for his 90-something years old mother. And he lives in Muskoka, and from what I can see, it is a very, very lonely life. I see what he posts on Facebook, and apparently he goes every day to look in the area for different mushrooms and so on. And I see him because he literally is not posting about, and this is a man who actually was in very similar position to what are your jobs here. Because he actually used to work at Rhode Island School of Design in, he himself has PhD in sociology, exactly, I think, or something like this. But now he's much more into fungi and mushrooms than this kind of thing. So here I just want to show you some of the images that he's been posting these days. And I was having exchanges with him. I told him, in fact, because I commented on one of his posts, and I told him I will be in Prague and I'll be talking about mushrooms. And he said he is mentally with us, and he has sent a message which I'm happy to share. I didn't include it in the slides, but I'm happy to share because he philosophized a little bit more than I do. So it is good. This is his hand, and here he's showing a mushroom which he found. I cannot remember what he has found, and what I see from his images is that day after day he gets more and more excited because he now realizes that he's finding things which he does not expect to find in this environment. And he is very much engaged in the study of it, the kind of to find out what is exactly the kind of mushroom that he has found, and so he was clearly familiar with the mushrooms that were native to Canada. But it seems when I follow his stories that actually he thinks all of a sudden lots of Asian kinds of mushrooms have appeared in the area of Muskoka, where he goes for expeditions every day. And now for me, I actually have not had the time to enter this conversation, but definitely I will do it. Now Toronto is where I have also lived in a period of my life. Is a very interesting city because it has nearly half its Asian population. Toronto is the place where when the handover of Hong Kong happened in 1997, massive numbers of Hong Kongers went to live there. So when you're in Toronto, if you stay downtown, you probably don't feel it. But if you go a little bit further after a certain area, you just feel as if you're in Hong Kong. There is no difference because everything starts being written in Chinese. Official languages in Canada. Um, French and English, but in fact, all the cash machines have Cantonese version of Chinese, which is kind of closer to Hong Kong and so. So it may well be that actually with this massive out-migration of people, and of course Toronto is a total melting pot. There are lots of Koreans, there are lots of absolutely every nationality is represented. So essentially he's surprised about these Asian kinds, and this was one of the Asian kind. I think this is what is the fungus called lingzhi in Chinese, which he was very surprised to find. But let's show the next one. So the next one I didn't take note of. These are the same mushrooms that in the first image He's not cut them, but I can, if you're interested, I can easily check and see precisely what kind of mushrooms. In the second one, he's already he's drying them, he's roasting them to dry them, and then he's excited to prepare. But this is the book which he thought is most important for him. You know it.
It's in Czech. It's already translated.
It's already translated. Yes. So he said that this is the book he thought he believes is the most important one to know. And I'm not showing more of his images, even though now I'm confirming that there is at least one guy in Canada, if you want to co-opt a distant member, you may consider to have grant. Yes. And now I want to say a few words about foraging. And always, as far as I'm concerned, in my mind, mushrooms comes with foraging. They are, of course, they are cultivated mushrooms. You can buy, just go for the next one. You can buy mushrooms in the shop and so on, but the really the excitement, and the more I think actually about these things, the excitement of mushrooms is connected with foraging, that you go and you find them and you appropriate them. So there is some pleasure in this, and I think it's also a quintessential form of entrepreneurship, which is also a particularly exciting type of entrepreneurship, because you have to do some kind of effort, but at the same time the fruits are very easy to get. So it is very low capital intensity. There are all sorts of books this many businesses you can start for £100. This is a business you can start for free, really. So it is absolutely just your pure entrepreneurial nature of going and kind of finding, like this guy who is very excited here, finding this. I remember when I was still young in Bulgaria, before emigrating, we had a village house in mountains. I was in my 20s, and we had a friend who actually introduced the ideology of foraging. He was staying with us quite often, and he was saying that we have to be self-sustaining. This guy is actually, by the way, also in Canada, so he's probably marveling the mushrooms around there. So we have to be self-sustaining. He was sending, after rain, he was sending his daughter with a bucket to collect all the snails, for example, so that we can eat snails. We would pick nettles, we would cut nettles from the yard. So essentially, it was very exciting because, as I said, I'm a city child. I absolutely would not know how to feed myself from the environment, but he was discovering, and he would go in the forest and would come very happily with 2 huge mushrooms, similar to what you see this guy in the picture, and said, and of course we went, and of course we would say, but mushrooms is dangerous. We don't know, this primordial fears essentially. But he was quite confident, and he would figure out how to cook them and so on. And here I'm displaying another kind. So the first kind, which I'm showing here, again, I don't know, and I didn't take note of the English names. It is very big in Bulgarian. It's called manatarka. It grows very big in forest. So you can have it, and what I remember, we were cooking it in a pan, it is as big as the pan. And it does not have a double, I know, because we were eating it fearfully but safely back then. These other ones here, which I'm showing in Bulgarian again, are called cheljadinki. They are small, and I bet you must have them also here in Czech Republic. Do you know the English name for them?
Chanterelle.
These are chanterelle. Yes, so I have seen millions of recipes of chanterelle in French cookbooks. And then we make, so this is more or less the type of soup that we would make with chanterelle in where I am from. And I don't know, actually I'd be really interested to taste something here, but chanterelle is yet another thing. And then in the market, you could also see people who have gone foraging and who have found mushrooms and who have brought And yet people are fearful to buy their mushrooms very often because they want guarantees that there is no danger and so on. But the foraging thing is huge. Can we have the next image, which is still on foraging? Here I selected images which relate to foraging that I have been observing. So for the past 3-4 years, I was contemplating a permanent move to a part of Italy, but I didn't move there permanently. But I spent quite a bit of time in a mountainous part of Italy, which is located between Bologna and Florence. So imagining that you must have been at least in one of these cities usually. But when you're in Florence or when you're in Bologna, you don't feel you're near mountains. But in fact, between these two places, there are some quite high mountains. And these are actually the areas where truffle hunting also goes on. So there is lots of truffle. And many, and it is Emilia-Romagna province and Tuscany, especially on the Tuscan side, truffle is a big business. And I must say that I don't really know so much about the Czech Republic, but I'm interested in food, and I have noticed that in France and in Italy particularly, people have absolute obsession sometimes with food. And if it's not obsession, it's very deep connection and huge respect to the food that locally, that can be sourced locally. So you tell me about the Czech Republic if it is like this or not. Where I come from originally, there used to be more respect, but now kind of they have allowed for all the kind of it used to be agricultural country, but they have allowed now for the agriculture to be destroyed. Where I live in Scotland Scotland is actually quite an agricultural country, but because it's Nordic, somehow does not have this self-esteem to present itself as a great food producer, even though they produce several kinds of things which are absolutely great locally. But Italy, when I go and when I live with my friends in Italy, in this area in the mountains, specifically where I stay, my friend is owning a forest of 300 chestnut trees. And this is the period when the chestnut trees are ripe. I absolutely don't even think anymore of going anywhere close to there in September, October season, because I cannot catch his attention for a second, because all his mind is in Maroni, how they have to collect, and he's an IT businessman from Florence. But kind of in the Maroni gathering season is absolutely life is totally evolving around these trees. We have to collect them, we have to dry them, we have to do. So it is kind of total dedication in my friend's specific case, it's about Maroni. But I have also met quite a few people who are totally into mushrooms there. And people locally who have local knowledge of mushrooms are in huge respect. It is like as if you have a healer in the village, kind of when people go for advice. To them, people go for advice about mushrooms, kind of you can see this woman sitting and they bring to her what they have foraged in the forest, exactly in a basket like this, and she starts kind of looking at this. So it is kind of community building exercise in these villages. So I have only observed it in this part of Italy. But I bet it's probably very similar in some places in France, I can imagine, which are more mountainous areas and so on. And then another aspect of foraging, of which I have only heard, if we can have the next image, I have only heard about, but I have seen it actually how it translates into this huge business, is foraging in Asia. So here I am displaying several of the kinds that are absolutely huge presence. And really, I have the biggest presence of fungi actually I have seen in the Asian continent. The first one is lion's mane, which you can probably buy in some, in capsular forms, but this is actually what the lion's mane mushroom looks like. The next one up there is lingji, which is, I don't know I only know the Chinese name, which is actually what Grant's had, the guy in Muskoka, he thought that actually he had found lychee, and this is why he was saying that this is amazing, because this is not a native of North America at all. And this one is kind of more maybe one of the, these both are quintessential offers because China has absolutely huge industry of well-being, these supplemental natural substances, kind of, so it exists in North America and in Europe, but it is only a fraction of the size of this industry. For dried mushrooms, reishi mushrooms, other different kinds, and these are also foraged. So as far as I know, they cannot be cultivated in commercially. So they rely on foraging. So I'm just displaying them here. But then I wanted to show images which are from. Okay, so I have stuck only to this, even though. Can we please have the next image? Yes, so I've not probably displayed, I actually had more images that were more presentable. But what you can see, so this, I personally have not seen this type of displays in Europe. And you can tell me if you have seen this type of selling mushrooms. So huge quantities of mushrooms. So in Hong Kong, for example, where I have been, I have not been, even though I am affiliated with University of Hong Kong, I have not been since before COVID. And this year I hope to finally go. But there are shops in Hong Kong and also in North Toronto, you can see this, where you are in some world which you don't know, you have absolutely no idea what this shop is full of. It is a medicinal shop. It has some substances, most of the substances are deeply dried, and you absolutely have got no clue what it is, and the big, only you can tell that a big fraction of these substances are usually mushrooms. So the industry of drying mushrooms for medicinal purposes, and of course, kind of as I said, there are some advanced wellness industries and kind of very fancy shops which are producing in capsular form. You can take for drinking in small bottles, extremely beautiful designs of. I wish actually these kind of things came here, because there will be. I see, for example, plenty of Vietnamese eateries around here in Stahemeasto. So kind of I see these shops absolutely neatly fitting. These shops here that I'm displaying are more kind of I never think that they will go for a crossover with Western culture, because everything is presented very roughly. But the reality is, and I have many friends, many Chinese friends, that these are parallel systems. You have at least 2 or 3 parallel systems of medicine that exist in these countries. So you can go for Western type of medicine where they'll treat you exactly as in a Western hospital, but you can go to Chinese doctor, or you can go to some of these healers who determine. So, for example, I remember 2018 in one remote part of Hong Kong, because of course everybody knows the skyscraper center of Hong Kong, but Hong Kong also has remote villages, which are 1 hour remote from the center and so on, and which have traditional lifestyle. So in a marketplace, in the corner, there is a man who sits and who actually is a local doctor. And what this local doctor is doing is he's putting together a combination. So this is the prescription that he's giving. He's putting together a combination of these mushrooms and cuts them and chops them and mixes them. And this is the soup that the person who is ill has to drink for the next 2 weeks or something like that. So I'm only talking about Cantonese, the area of Canton of South China here, but when you go to Turkey, for example, if you go to some markets in Turkey, you can also see that along with other dried not so much for medicinal purposes, but they dry aubergines, they dry tomatoes, like, which usually hang from the ceiling. They also do quite a bit of mushrooms. And the final thing that I want to talk about, if we can move into the presentation, is about the Yunnan mushroom hot pot. Nothing to do with cinema, just with eating mushrooms. But I have to share that this is probably one of the most delicious meals I have ever had in my life. And absolutely, I cannot, for me, it's absolutely superior to any kind of anything what my Italian friends may do in Tuscany or um, kind of other reputed cuisines. So Yunnan, I should have displayed maybe a map. Do you have any idea what Yunnan is? One of the southern provinces of China. It has borders with Vietnam, Myanmar. So kind of like, it is not like, Beijing is in the north, and so this is kind of like, it has like, resemblance to Thai a little bit, kind of this into Chinese, and the cuisine, of course, is that. And I had no idea. So hot pot is something which Chinese eat in all provinces, and it is amazing. And it is usually one kind of like, boiling a pot of broth which is on the table, and you put different things, and like, you fish them out. And you eat them. So it is different combinations, but it is different in different parts of China. And really, before COVID, I was blessed to be able to travel to different parts of China, it was very happy life for me, because China is like, it's a different world really, and it was finally opening up, like, it was finally possible to start going to different places. Now I don't even know if I'll be able to go again. It is unfortunately closing again. So I had experienced hot pot, and actually that year I was in a city called Xiamen, which is near to Taiwan, to the island of Taiwan, and they specifically took us to eat hot pot, which would be with specific kind of Xiamen fungus. So kind of like, fungus is eaten absolutely everywhere, dried fungus usually. Even I now, because I have started making these soups at home, I go to the Chinese shop now because I know about it. I source it and I buy it, and I myself use fungus. I went. So can we show the first clip? So when I went to Yunnan, I always wanted to go to Yunnan. I went to one famous place called Dali. So these are views of Dali. And it is on a lake called Lake Erhai. It is really some extremely beautiful area. Behind these mountains is Myanmar. So this is on the very border with Myanmar. And I selected pictures which show these clouds, because the clouds are very important on the top of the mountain, because this is from where they source the mushrooms. So they also forage. And the foragers go, but it is always very wet, because these kind of eternal clouds are always on the top of the mountain there for some reason. The climate is such. And in fact, I had seen a very beautiful documentary film by one of the most famous Chinese filmmakers, which was set in Dali. And I was saying, oh my God, what is this absolutely incredibly beautiful place? And I found out, so like, this is specifically why I went into Dali. And when we were in Dali, it turns out I had no idea, because hot pot is absolutely everywhere, that the specialty of Yunnan is actually mushroom Dali, mushroom hot pot. And here on the picture, you see what is usually displayed in front of the restaurant. So this is how they attract you, because in China usually when you go to a restaurant, only at this point they start cooking the meal that you're going to eat. So it is considered that you have to eat absolutely fresh food, and in most cases you have fish tanks. So you have to point actually at the fish that you want to eat. It's like, horrible, but what can we do? So this kind of like, very many varieties of mushrooms were displayed, and like, typical like they do in the West, like, people come to invite you to this restaurant, to that restaurant, and so on. And I can only regret that the first day when I saw this place, I rejected it and didn't know. And, like, if I knew, I would have eaten it more, because it was the next day already. It was such an unbelievable pleasure. So can we please have the next one? And essentially what they do, so here you see the pot, which is usually, uh, it has broth which is from duck or chicken or something like this, and then they bring a very big kind of plate, what you see here, which has a variety of different mushrooms which are chopped, and they just plunge them into the pot, and they have to cook a little bit, and then you start kind of with the chopsticks, kind of pulling out. But it is some absolutely, I'm sorry, I don't know how to communicate tastes, but it is some totally sublime taste. And here I picked this image specifically because it shows the variety of mushrooms that they are using. So the little tiny mushrooms, do you know this? This kind of, sorry, I lost my image. So do you know on the image that here I have to point? Are you familiar with these mushrooms? These are called enoki mushrooms. They are Japanese.
Yeah.
So these are enoki. These I don't know what they are called, but they are also. So I don't think we have these varieties in Europe. But you correct me, because of course you know much more.
Enoki sometimes is sold here also. Enoki.
Yes, yes.
But
Enoki,
the other ones,
enoki
I don't know the other
buy
ones.
in Scotland. When I go to the Chinese shop in Scotland, I can buy enoki. Sometimes this, which is a variety of enoki. These I have not seen. I have only seen that. Here, this is another kind of mushroom. And I'm not sure if this is not the fungus which we ate in Xiamen. And it is structured very interesting and looks very different from everything I've ever seen. So I am positive that quite a few of the varieties I have experienced in this Yunnan hot pot. And the Yunnan hot pot is really, they may put like, because here in the image you see some greens, you see some fish balls, but mainly it is usually just a mixture of mushrooms. And I just have one last image of, can we show the last image, please? Of just further varieties of this. These are all the mushrooms, because you can see the enoki swimming in, and like, these are the pots that have the divided with two different kinds of broth. One is spicy broth, the other one is not so spicy, and so on. And this is actually all I will be saying today. I don't have a conclusion, except to say that when I discovered this thing, I never expected that I would be saying that one of the most sublime meals of my life has been entirely based on mushrooms. And if you lose your jobs, consider starting a business.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
For taking us on this world tour of
my pleasure, because to look at these fantastic images, and
I find it special, like the fact that you went to a place because of cinema and found mushrooms there, like very inspirational.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask Karel if he would like to comment on anything that we've heard in the talk, and like of any of the associations with the mushrooms.
Okay, so first, thank you very much for your talk. I think there were a bunch of really exciting examples of what fungi can represent in different cultures. And then maybe the first point would be the context of ethnomycology, which is a kind of subdiscipline of mycology established in the 50s or 60s, I would say, and the famous classic author is Robert Gordon Wesson, who was a interesting person himself. He worked for CIA actually, and he's and mycology was his like hobby.
Yes, like Jasper Sharp, who is specialist on Japanese pink cinema.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's quite usual that these guys. But he wrote with his Russian wife 2 volumes of ethnomycological classifications, and he's famous for his classification between mycophilic and mycophobic nations. So and it's it was kind of Eurocentric endeavor.
Yes,
I would
from the few things.
because they wrote about mainly mycophilic nations of Central Eastern Europe and Northern Europe partly, and of course Italy and part of France and the other, and mainly Anglo-Saxon world as a mycophobic. So this was a kind of first.
And sorry to interject, I want to ask you, where is Germany in this classification?
It's as far as I know, southern part of Germany and on Austria, the parts that border with Alps, are full of people who and full of traditions of foraging mushrooms. So
not the north so much, because I will give you one film related anecdote. Many years ago, I had a visit from a famous Russian filmmaker, Soviet filmmaker, who is no longer alive, Alexander Askoldov. So I am a film historian. You may not know who he is, because he's one of the people who was affected by censorship, and he's only made one absolutely great film, which was banned after that, and he didn't have the career. Askoldov made a film called The Commissar. So if you may know or not know it, in '67, which was then banned and only released in perestroika times. So I had Askoldov visiting with me. He had emigrated from Russia by that time, and he was living in Sweden and Berlin. And he, in Sweden, he had discovered, he was doing it in Moscow, in Podmoskovia, the so-called Podmoskovia, around Moscow. And in Sweden, he had foraged quite a bit, but he was very happy now living in Berlin, because he said, yes, in Berlin, you have plenty, they don't do, I go and I have huge amounts of mushrooms on my table, this is such pleasure and so on. And I mentioned all of this because this was actually his closing jars with various mushrooms, and then opening on a certain day and making a soup and so on. This was the basis of his close friendship. He had forged close friendship with Wim Wenders, who is Wim Wenders is much better known, so you'd know who is Wim Wenders. So clearly, Wim Wenders also got inducted by Askoldov into this foraging, and they would go, both of them, and then end up with this huge. But I didn't know about the nation's classification. So certainly, Wim Wenders is one convert.
Okay.
To this. Sorry.
Yeah. As far as I know, the Bavaria is quite famous and full of amateur mycologist clubs.
Right.
It's interesting thing, but yeah, I will come back to it. But in fact, what I think we see here as something which is mycophilic, either mycophilic or mycophobic, is always a great affection towards the fungi. So it means it's not kind of there's a lot of representations of fungi, not only in popular culture, but also in general in society, that are not kind of descriptive. They are very emotional. You either fear or you love them. So this is, I think, very interesting for what I would like to study actually, because it enables us to study fungi as an object of a different kind of attitudes, and in this sense, Lenka Vrablikova, who will have lecture during our lecture series, wrote an article using feminist subaltern theory of othering. So if you just place affect on a subject, either hate or love, it's a way of othering, the object. So I think this is very nice example of this process of othering, and I'm very eager to listen to her talk about this. So this makes, I think, fungi a kind of special kind of object of study, because this is the basic framework is kind of emotional and affective in this sense. So. And
again, can I interject to say something? This is very interesting that you said you either fear or love them, which is fine. Usually when we say love, usually the opposite is hate. But nobody hates actually the mushrooms. Nobody hates them, we only fear them.
Well, I never eat it, so it really depends. I think it
Really?
But you don't hate, you do not hate it. And,
I think there
you
is
have
no
them
hate,
on
there is fear.
each t-shirt.
But when it comes to the cuisine,
Yeah.
because you spoke a lot about cooking and like the role mushrooms play in our culinary lives. I do hate them in that respect. Like I really can't.
And
close to that. So.
In July, I had a kind of first experience with really a real mycophobic person at the Congress of European Association of Social Anthropologists, and we met an Irish scholar who works in Scotland.
Right.
And we, of course, talked with her and with others about our excitement with fungi and what's interesting. And she first she said, okay, interesting issue. And then she started to say, I cannot believe you eat these things. We even do not know if they are alive or dead. And it's disgusting.
They are alive as we see in the film.
She said, she said, I totally disagree with eating mushrooms, and it was really exciting. And no, of course, she was okay with us, and so it didn't influence her attitude towards us, mushroom eaters. But still, she was really. Disgusting.
If you notice, from what I say about childhood, I think fear for attraction is a decent explanation, because I think this is for many children, you can say.
Yeah.
But I for some reason, when I have exposed myself to this thing, I have had not a second consideration. I don't know. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to actually go back to that, because the toadstools, the komburkas, and I think that we might talk about the role that popular culture can have in spreading some knowledge, but also in spreading some knowledge that is not maybe that useful, because toadstools are poisonous, that's true. But there are mushrooms that are way more poisonous and that you can find here as well, and they're just not represented in, in the culture that especially small children come in contact with. So I just wanted to ask, if you have any thoughts on that, because it's always the toadstool that is presented. Yeah.
What I think is also important here in Czech context, I'm not very familiar with other mycophilic nations in this regarding this issue, is that there was a kind of modernizing movement advocating for mushroom foraging from the beginning of the 20th century here. Very successful. The mycologists were usually kind of amateur guys, but Jan Bezděk, who was the first one, did really tours around the country, showing people that there are a lot of species of mushrooms that are very good for for their health, for eating and so on, and showing also the poisonous ones. And he was kind of he tried to was kind of enlightenment. I think, and the first people who were involved in this, who wrote the first guides in 1910s and 20s, and established the Czech Mycological Society in 20s, the Amateur Mycological Society, where there was very optimistic modernists. They used discourse of hygiene and health that you can get from foraging the mushrooms. You go into the forests. It's healthy. It's not only physically but mentally. People from the industrial centers should go outside the city, and so it's important for recreation, and they also use aesthetization of the forests and mushrooms as a goal, because it was a part. The idea was that it's also a part of a fulfilled life of a modern man. That you have to have aesthetic experience in the nature, and you have to you be healthy and so on. So this is, I think, in a Czech society, the public view of mushroom foraging is very much influenced by these generations of these mushroom foraging modernists, I would say.
But does it evolve around the mushrooms, or it evolves around the forest?
About the mushrooms.
About the mushrooms.
Yeah.
Because your description of this reminds me very much to one a line of thought which is extremely influential in Japan, and I am myself great supporter of this and practicing really. It's called Shinrin-yoku. I don't know if you've come across this, which translates as forest bathing. And there are several books, like, it is sociologists mainly who have written on these things, but it is a movement that essentially propagates about going to the forest. The description that you just gave, I would absolutely apply, but mushrooms are part of it, but it's one of the activities that one can do, but mainly it is about kind of like, going back to nature. And as I'm saying, there are even practitioners who are trained to guide. I started doing, with a woman who was doing this in Hong Kong, and then I have done in various parts of Asia, and it can be absolutely successfully done here. And in fact, now I start remembering about films. Of course, there is one amazing American film shot in the north of California called Shinrin-yoku, American documentary, and various films on art. I don't know if you have this Franco-German channel here, which actually are showing people who are practicing Shinrin-yoku here in different parts of Albania, in Romania. There are forests like this, and so on. So this is very interesting to know that they were kind of like, people to articulate an ideology of these things. Only in what I've seen, mushrooms are present, only are not the focal point. Going to the forest is the focal point.
Can I?
Yes, sure.
Add something? I will be brief, actually. I think we are running out of time. Just two books that are very important for this study of mushroom foraging. First is Gary Allen Fine, and it's called Moral Tales, and it was really something very exceptional in its late 70s, 80s, when he did this qualitative research among a group of young mycophilic people in the United States. And this was well before the mushrooms and fungi have become popular and fashionable, among artists and among kind of alternatively oriented people. But he did this very micro-sociological study on this group of environmentalists. So these people were activists towards environmental issues, and one part of their activity was foraging morels. And so it started in this kind of mycophobic Anglo-Saxon context. It was something that was very alternative, kind of underground activity, even rebellious activity for people who protested capitalist, system and so on, and they went to forests and so on. So this is one kind of perspective that is, I think, important and became very important in United States, especially in the United States in recent years, where there are groups of radical mycology who try to change the world with fungi and so on. But it's different than in mycophilic nations, because here we have kind of tradition. And then just 2 sentences about the second very famous book in social anthropology by Anna Tsing, which is called The Mushroom at the End of the World. Mm-hmm. And it's ethnography of Chinese mushroom matsutake. Mm-hmm. Very interesting story, going from Japan to United States and back and to other parts of the world. But the very interesting, the start of the story is that matsutake was a very popular mushroom in Japan until 60s or 70s in the forest nearby the industrial towns, because matsutake likes the kind of forests that are not virgin forests, that are,
in the west of Japan.
They were used by forestry industry and so on. So the matsutake uses this kind of damaged forest, for example, for gaining their nutrition. And in 70s, these forests were kind of recultivated. So the mushroom kind of disappeared, and became, in recent 2 decades, it became a kind of luxury thing with emotional bond to childhood of the Japanese, old Japanese generation. And now in a couple of years, it became like fever, and some of the mushrooms were sold for tens of thousands of dollars, for example, if they were. So it was and it started, of course, kind of industry of this luxury, consumer object, and and in the United States, in the damaged forests of eastern United States, the state, they started to find them. So, and they sold them to Japanese, for a lot of money, and this is an excellent ethnography of these kind of global market DIY activities and so on. So I would really recommend this book.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this. Thank you for sticking out with us until the very end. And I hope to see you at the next lecture, which will be held in October, and where Karel will be talking in Czech that time. Well, more about what he started to talk about here. Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.